I remember clear as day the way the sun hit the mist off the creek that morning, soft, almost ghostly, the kind of light that stops you in your tracks, makes you want to breathe deep and just stand there a while, let the world pause with you. But there was no pausing for me, not that day, not most days since I bought this land. I'd owned it about 6 months, but I still felt like a stranger, like the place was sizing me up, waiting to see if I measured up to the job of being its caretaker. Those hills, the way they rolled just right for the runoff, the stubborn patches of thistle, the old creek that cut through the lot, all of it felt alive. And every morning it gave me a new job. I had this battered old bulldozer, a 1989 Komatsu I picked up secondhand off a buddy who ran an auction. She was cranky, slow to start, burned oil like it was going out of style, but reliable in that blue-collar, do-your-worst kind of way. That morning, I climbed up on her cracked vinyl seat, fired her up, and just soaked in the sound, a war horse's groan, black diesel smoke curling into the cool air. It felt right. I dropped the blade and started shoring up a section of the creek bank that was slipping away after the spring rains, working fast because I knew if I didn't, I'd lose some of the best ground on the property. I'd staked my flags the night before well away from the water, marked my lines so I wouldn't cross any boundaries. I was in my zone, just me, the machine, and a chorus of birds that never seemed to take a day off. That's why I didn't notice the white SUV until it was already stopped at the bottom gate. The kind of car you expect to see realtors drive, not law enforcement, no markings, no badge on the dash, just three guys in matching dark polos with HOA compliance enforcement stenciled on their chests, marching up like a bad episode of Cops. The tallest one, late 40s, had a megaphone. Operator of the dozer, shut it down and step away from the equipment. I almost laughed, but the look on his face made me think better of it. I killed the engine, wiped my hands, walked over as they lined up like a firing squad. "You got a permit for that excavation?" the tall one asked, all business. I raised an eyebrow. "On my own land." The shorter guy, stocky, clean-shaven, pointed at the creek like he was unveiling a holy relic. "That's a Class C waterway. You're within the environmental protection buffer. Violation of the HOA's environmental clause." The third one, clipboard in hand, didn't say much, just nodded along like a background character in a courtroom drama. He finally piped up, "Any disturbance within 50 feet of the creek requires prior approval." I took a breath. "I'm 63 feet from the water line," I told him, marked and measured. "I'm not disturbing anything, I'm protecting the bank." But they weren't interested in reason, just in flexing authority. "Sir, we're ordering you to cease all operations," the tall one said, and the clipboard guy started talking fines, lien placement, and paperwork. That word lien always lands heavy, like someone's cocking a gun just out of sight. I crossed my arms. Under whose legal authority? That got them a pause, the mask slipping. "Evergreen Bluffs Homeowners Association," clipboard guy said. "I didn't ask who you work for. I asked whose authority you're using." Another silence, thicker this time, until finally, "We'll be following up with enforcement paperwork. Expect to hear from us." And just like that, they turned, climbed back into the SUV, and disappeared in a swirl of dust, not a badge in sight, just the echo of their own self-importance. See, what they didn't know was that I hadn't just bought this parcel. I'd bought the whole watershed up and downstream from Tom Mills, the old rancher who owned the land for decades before me and got tired of fighting the HOA. I owned every inch that mattered. But I wasn't about to start a war on day one. I've seen enough of those for a few lifetimes. Sometimes you let your opponent think they're ahead just to watch how far they'll go. Next morning, they doubled down, 2 SUVs this time, parked just beyond my fence, engines idling, windows tinted dark like they were expecting trouble. Same 3 plus an older guy, gray hair pressed, shirt gold badge shaped like a star. Not a real badge, but it glittered like he wanted it to be. "You are officially being served with a notice of violation," the tall one said, holding out a plastic folder. "Cease all work within the jurisdictional buffer zone or face fines up to $1,000 a day." I took my time, sipped my coffee. "Jurisdictional buffer zone?" I asked. "Is that something you came up with over breakfast?" The badge guy, Raymond Delaney, Chief Compliance Officer, according to his shirt, stepped up. "We're authorized by the board to enforce compliance," he said, chest puffed out like a cartoon sheriff. I told him, "Only law enforcement or someone appointed by ordinance can issue citations. That you clipboard guy shifted his weight, looking less sure now. But they tried again, quoting bylaws and environmental clauses, saying I'd altered protected terrain. Which agency defines that, I asked. Section 6B of the HOA charter, they said, but I cut in. That doesn't override municipal zoning or private property rights. You're a nonprofit with a bake sale, not a government agency. Delaney started to argue, but I'd had enough. You're trespassing, I said plain and clear. That hung in the air a second, and for the first time they looked genuinely unsure. Thing is, I'm not most folks. 30 years in the Navy logistics paperwork chain of command, I can smell a power grab a mile off. Here's what's going to happen, I told them. You're going to leave, and you're going to think long and hard before you try this again. Delaney warned they'd escalate, threaten legal arbitration. I grinned. Please do, because when your lawyer opens that file, he'll find a deed that gives me full rights over every inch of this creek, including the path your HOA built without a permit and the runoff your maintenance guy dumps. This time they backed away. Didn't strut, just left defeated but not done. I knew it wasn't over. Bullies don't quit after one swing. They come back with lawyers or new angles. I mailed the HOA a formal cease and desist, copies of the deed parcel numbers, a list of every violation, foot traffic, benches, drainage. I visited City Hall, made sure zoning, public works, everyone knew the score. I dropped off a folder at Public Works, no drama, just facts. At a cafe that afternoon, Tom Mill's daughter waited on me, asked how things were going. Lively, I said, and she grinned. 3 days later, a fat envelope landed in my mailbox. A hearing notice, accusations of unauthorized excavation. Slick legalese, no mention of the actual property records I'd already sent. I gathered my files, deed survey maps, zoning confirmations. 12 blue binders, one for each board member. I called Lisa from the Tribune, a reporter with a nose for HOA drama. She asked, "Do you have proof?" "Can I use your name?" "When's the meeting?" I told her Friday, 6 p.m. That day I showed up early, dressed decent, not defiant. Board members lined up at their folding table, Delaney's fake badge gleaming. I signed in. "My name is John Weller. I own the creek." That got some murmurs. When it was my turn, I held up the deed. "I own this land, every foot you claim as common ground. Your boards issued warnings, fines, and trespassed on property you don't own. I've filed with the city, the county, and the press. If you persist, I'll seek damages." Silence. Then applause. Not loud, but real. Delaney went quiet. The board broke first in spirit, then in practice. The next day, a manila envelope appeared, city confirmation. No jurisdiction, no buffer, no authority for the HOA. Vindication didn't feel like victory, just clarity. I pinned the city's letter to the community board right under the HOA's summer volunteer flyer. Printed new signs, private property. Owner, John Weller. The balance shifted. That week I got an email from Kelly Raymond, the secretary. She wanted a meeting. Not Delaney, not the bullies, someone different. We met at a cafe. Kelly was tired but honest. We didn't know Tom sold the Watershed. We thought he'd never give up. I shrugged. He didn't. The board convinced him. She offered peace, remove the bridge, reroute the path, acknowledge the change, maybe work out limited access with my terms. She wasn't bluffing. For the first time, I saw humility. I told her I'd consider it, not for them, but for the folks who just wanted to walk by the water, the kids who fished, the old man who strolled the path. Back home, I dug into the HOA bylaws looking for the next trap. Sure enough, deep in Section 9, if a green space or watershed is transferred, the HOA claims behavioral jurisdiction unless the new owner files an exemption within 60 days. Not legal, but enough to muddy the water, enough to scare the uninformed. Luckily, I'd filed with the city, the county, just not the HOA. I drafted a formal letter, cited the dates, included every certification. I nullified their claim retroactively and sent it certified mail, hand-delivered a copy to Kelly, too. Then came the last trick. The HOA hired an environmental consultant to review my property, tried to scare me with recommended site visits. I called my buddy at Municipal Compliance. He replied, no status, no jurisdiction, no access. I printed his email, taped it to my gate, then called the county to report illegal drainage from HOA land into my creek. A week later, the county issued a citation public notice on the board. The community woke up. Neighbors I'd barely met brought banana bread, asked if I'd run for the board. I never thought about it, but when the vote came, I said yes. Delaney resigned the next day, no fanfare, just an email. As interim president, I paused all fines, reviewed every citation. I met neighbors, listened, called a real town hall under the oaks by the creek. Edison lights strung up kids, laughing, folks eating together instead of squinting over rule books. I told the full story, the fake badges, the loopholes, the power plays, and then I promised from now on the creek would be a commons privately preserved but open for the community by day, a handshake deal. We built benches, planted gardens, and named it Weller Creek Commons. The paper called it a community oasis. The old footbridge got a plaque. This land stood because one man did. Most mornings I take my coffee down to the water, watch the sun, catch the mist, listen to the stories the creek tells. Every now and then someone asks why I fought so hard, why I didn't just let it go. I always say the same thing, because land isn't about ownership, it's about care. The fight started with a bulldozer and ended with a park. That creek runs free now, no more false claims, no more paper kings, just neighbors, a ribbon of water, and the promise that justice, real honest, slow-moving justice, can still win if you're stubborn enough to see it through. So what do you think? Was I right to fight the HOA, or should there be stricter community rules even on private land? Drop your thoughts below. Let's hear what you'd do if this was your backyard.